Welcome to the latest episode of Meet the Press Slam. I'm your host, Danny Kugler, and we will talk about the 5-star rating system and its relevance in wrestling community and wrestling today, and intermissions in wrestling. Are they good? Are they bad? Overall pacing of live wrestling and other topics in the world of pro wrestling. I'll leave that as a surprise for you guys what we get into. This is obviously a pre-recorded bit, as some of the audio became chopped off at the beginning of the recording, so I'm redoing this. Let me get to our guest today. My guest today is Tom Batista, host of the Military Industrial Suplex podcast, and member at ProWrestlingOnly.com. He's also a member of the Place to Be Nation podcast feed. And Kelly Harrass, writer and contributor to Voices of Wrestling. You can see his Tiger Mask W reviews at voicesofwrestling.com, and he also does WWE pay-per-view reviews. Here are the rules for each Meet the Press Slam debate. Each debate will be assigned a time limit that we will discuss the topic for a length of time. I am the moderator and can direct questions to either guest, and they'll have time to discuss, and the other guest will have time to rebut. And Danny is the one directing the discussion, and if he has thoughts, he can chime in at any point. The final rapid five, we tried to get that in there, just overall summing up what we said in the last 5 minutes of the discussion. The final segment will require a guest to present something within the wrestling business or outside the wrestling business. It doesn't have to be something pertaining to wrestling, but something they find interesting, and have fun and spirited debate. So, this recording picks up when Kelly goes absolutely not to the rules and all banter and juvenile delinquency comes there. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you enjoy your day. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.
Absolutely not. And then he just hangs up and is like, you know what?
That's it, I'm out of here. I quit.
But those are pretty self-explanatory rules. I don't think you'll be quitting over that.
Hey, there's never been a challenge I haven't attempted to walk out the door on, so.
The 5-star rating system in pro wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And this will have a 40-minute time limit, so we can discuss this for a good while. 40 minutes. And there's a lot to get to in the 5-star rating system. With the recent 6-star and 6.25-star ratings given out by Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter for both Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada matches, the 5-star rating system in the wrestling media has been questioned and ostracized. First off, does anyone know the origins of how Dave made it famous?
I don't, actually. He's been at it for longer than pretty much any other journalist in wrestling that I can think of. So I kind of just assumed that over time it grew in popularity. But outside of that, no, I really don't have any clear idea.
Tom, how about you?
Well, he essentially started it because, obviously, wrestling is subjective. All art is subjective. There's a lot of things that you can't really quantify with a number or an actual rating system, as it were, as if we're like safety, for example. Safety in a nuclear power plant is not abstract and it's not objective. Either a certain room is below 50 degrees or there's a fire extinguisher 3 feet away from the fire exit, or there isn't. So it's very clear. But being one of the biggest publications, and you have to look at other media, you look at Cisco and Ebert and all these other guys, and so Dave Meltzer essentially adopted that. But he didn't want to just do a binary system, because there's a lot of issues, which I'm sure we're going to cover, with the binary system. Instead, went with the 5 stars, which adds a little class to it. It's interesting because a lot of people now are talking about the 6 stars, but this has been going on since the 80s. Dave Meltzer's first 6-star rating. I mean, the lid's been blown off since 1989. Again, we'll talk about that more, but yeah, that's why it was started.
I feel as if the name Jim Cornette would come up here, and we always get an eye roll about Jim Cornette. Tell us about it. But if you've heard the story heard by Cornette, he used it in his newsletter. Before Dave used it in his newsletter, Dave popularized it.
Yeah, it was him and Dooley, right?
I think it was him and Dooley, yeah. Okay. I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard that.
Mm.
But
then again, to me, it's one of those things. It's like, you look at the history of WrestleMania, or the story of WrestleMania, and WWE makes it sound as though Vince McMahon was just on vacation one day skiing and decided, hey, pro wrestling needs a big event. As if the big event did not happen only a few years later, as if World Class did not have stadium shows, as if Luke Gotch and Hackenschmidt, as these things in baseball stadiums filling out around the world, as if none of this ever occurred. And then he had the idea of WrestleMania. So, it's one of those things where no idea is original. Who did it first?
It's all about retelling history.
Yeah, it's all about retelling history.
That's one of the things where if you look at the WWE way of telling their history, sometimes it's very different from what happened. I mean, for the longest time when I was a kid, I didn't realize that WCW wasn't always WCW. Like, it took me a long time to put together that Jim Crockett Promotions was actually the WCW that WWE always talked about in these documentaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, and you even look at WWE's own history and the way they romanticize some things and leave some other things out, and you question it.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what really happened, and now there's sources to debunk what WWE says. Like, very good sources. If you catching my drift. So in that case, the fact that maybe one man has become the authority of wrestling ratings is a little off base. But at the same time, he's been doing it for 30 years.
Yeah, there's something definitely to say about he's been doing it the longest and by far most consistent. Whether or not Cornette originated it, that kind of doesn't matter at this point, because Meltzer's made his name on it.
Yeah, and that's just what it is with anything when you really think about it. You think of the backslide. There's so many videos online of people doing that move prior to Michael Jackson's historic Motown 25 performance. But him renaming it, putting it with the song, the branding, just the whole iconic aspect of the performance, 25 million people watching it, that's what's remembered. So whenever today you talk about the backslide, no one will know what you're talking about. But if you say moonwalk, people automatically know Michael Jackson. So in this case, I think that the etymology of, or rather the beginnings, I should say, of the 5-star rating system in pro wrestling, to me is kind of a moot point. I mean, I would de facto give it to Meltzer, but even if Cornette started it, it wasn't really a revolutionary concept as far as innovation is concerned, but it was revolutionary in the way that people think and talk about pro wrestling, because here we are having a conversation about a man's opinion, about 5 stars, 5, 6 stars, 10 stars. So, and this actually impacts, when you start talking to some fans, how they grade wrestling and how they look at wrestling. So it's not in a light aspect when we start talking about the 5 stars or Dave Meltzer's ratings, because this has actually impacted the business in some way.
Yes, and you look at sites like Voices of Wrestling, and you look at sites like Wrestling with Words, Sakuna Kaeda, and other sites like that, and Blog of Doom, and you see that this 5-star rating system, Dave influenced a whole group of writers that rate this way and talk about wrestling this way. They might not agree with him, but he influenced them. Am I right, Tom?
Yeah, I think so in a way. I mean, it's one of those things where at some point in time you have to put your foot down and you have to settle into something. And whether what you settle on or the platform that you're using, that can always be questioned. And people have questioned it. I mean, obviously we're going to question it to some extent. But again, you have to have some sort of standard. And that's the standard that we have. And thus far, especially when we start taking a look at the track record over the last 20, 30 years, it's pretty much been spot on with Dave Meltzer. I mean, this guy doesn't have X-Pac versus the Big Boss Man from a 1998 Monday Night Raw as a 5-star match, and he doesn't really give him out that much. So, this definitely credibility has been building for the last 30-something years, 30-odd years or so.
Kelly, your thoughts?
At this point, it's something... This sounds harsher than I mean it. It's something that we're stuck with. Because, just from my experiences with Voices of Wrestling, there's been times when certain writers for us have considered getting away from it, and we've realized, we can't. Because people want the star ratings. A lot of times you get people that go through reviews, they just look at the match and then look at the rating, just to kind of give them a guide on what to see.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I get that. Yeah, it's one of those things where I've done it plenty of times, and it's one of those things where it's at the same time, it's I kind of feel like an ass for doing that, because I'm not really paying attention to the actual review, but you gotta save time sometimes.
Well, it's a good summary. It's a good summary, and it's a fair summary. If I see something that is 3 stars, and again, it's from a writer or a contributor of some sort that I followed for some time, and perhaps him and I are in sync in some way, then I can say, okay, I understand where this match is. And that's how a lot of people digest news now. They don't read the actual article. They read the comments, or they read the heading. They look at the picture, and they get a quick summary of what they think is going on. And next thing you know, they're talking about it. And that's what we see with the 5-star rating. It's really hard to shift the paradigm and create something else, because again, as you said, everyone is used to the 5 stars. The 5-star system isn't broken, in my opinion, and it's something that works. It's something that's clean. When you start taking a look through the history of surveys and just gathering analytics, when we start talking about analytics, we talk about right now where we're at the point where companies are not interested in just the words of a person. They're not interested in 5-star reviews. They're interested in the sentiment. Somebody giving a restaurant 5 stars could just because their brother works there. And so they just want to give the restaurant 5 stars. Back in the 90s, a restaurant could use that and say, hey, we have a 5-star rating. Now, let's just say 100 different people went to that restaurant. Everybody knows everyone. It's a family. It's a small community. That restaurant has rats, roaches. The ice cream machine doesn't work. It's just terrible. It stinks in there. But it has a 5-star rating on Yelp. Well, now you fast forward, and companies are not looking for that. They're going beyond that, and they want to know what the customers are actually saying, what the clients are actually saying. And so we're looking at sentiment. So one of the things that WWE does, and TNA I assume as well, and just all these other major wrestling companies, is they look at social media and they understand, hey, this match is 5-star, whatever it may be. But they're reading 5 stars and 3 stars and 2 stars in a sentiment type of way, as well as everything else within the sentence and, all these structured words. And they digest it in documents, and then they come out and say, okay, we understand that X amount of people think this is 5 stars, and they really believe that, versus someone just saying, well, this is a 5-star match, and then going on to be completely sarcastic and deride the entire thing. So we are at it's very interesting. I wonder how this will translate to the fan in the future, because again, WWE and all these other companies have software at their disposal. But what is the average fan going to use to determine, hey, Kelly gave a match 3 stars, but what does he mean by that?
And that's where the explanations come in. And, people don't read explanations anymore. It's just the nature of the beast. If you feel like the match is 3 stars, but something went wrong, and you want to dock a quarter star, say, and give it 2 3/4, and for example, I'm just saying.
But so there's 2 things there, and then I want Kelly to chime in because I definitely want Kelly's thoughts on this. I feel like some people watch wrestling like the way some people give a tip. So there's a very asshole way to give a tip at a restaurant. You sit down $5, let's just say 5 ones. Every time the waiter messes up or something's late or food's cold, you just pull away $1. So at the end of the night, you may just be left with $1 as a tip or nothing. And I feel as though when some people watch matches, they treat it that way and say, oh, there's a botch. Let's take away a star. Oh, another one. Let's take another one. And next thing you know, you're given a match that if you look at it in its entirety, yeah, sure, it had some problems, but overall it was a really good match. And so I see people digesting it like that. The second thing is the wrestling landscape in the 21st century is beyond amazing. I mean, there's so many options out there. And not only are there so many options, because in reality, there's always been a lot of options, but we have such an easy way to watch these options and to participate with these different wrestling promotions. And we can do multiple wrestling promotions and multiple viewing in one day. And so I think when you combine those 2 factors, I mean, it's really, it definitely contributes some negative aspects, if you will, to the current climate.
Kelly, your thoughts?
I never thought about looking at it that way, like the tip, but I can definitely see how some people can do that now that you mention it.
Oh, yeah.
Personally, I go with my star ratings like this. 1 star and lower is actively bad. 2 stars is kind of average. 3 stars is good, something you would recommend to someone. 4 stars is great, and then 5 is the best we can get, And of course, and I always say to people, there's a much bigger difference, to me personally, between a 4-star and a 4 3/4 star match than there is between a 3-star and a 3 3/4 star match.
And what's the difference?
I think it's because for me, 4 3/4 stars, that's when I kind of put it in my match of the year candidate list. And I feel like that's when, once you get past 4 stars, each quarter of a star is kind of just harder to earn. And it's hard to put into words what it is. It's more or less the feeling that is associated with it. It's the story they're telling. It's what kind of athleticism they're using, all that kind of stuff. And it's different for each match. I mean, you're going to have some, like, say I'm watching a bloody lucha brawl, and I'm also watching, like, a Young Bucks match. I could give them the same rating, but it'd be for completely different reasons.
Mm-hmm. No,
Right.
and of course that makes sense, because it's like the same reason why you would enjoy a horror movie isn't necessarily the same reason why you would enjoy a comedy movie.
Exactly.
And so,
yeah, and it's almost, there's genres in wrestling matches, and people don't really think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting,
I definitely agree.
What's interesting is not only are we talking about grading the format, but what's interesting about these star ratings, and this is one of the things that Netflix has run into, is that the star ratings in pro wrestling doesn't necessarily tell us if it should be watched. And what I mean by that is, you and I, Kelly and Dan, we can all think of bad wrestling matches. Wrestling matches where you're saying, all right, this was terrible. But we would recommend someone watch it for just the terribleness associated to it. So you think of something like Charmel versus Jenna Marascas for Victory Road so long ago in TNA. That is a bad match. However, that match, that 1-star match, was the talk of the town, and a lot of people watched it. And so it's interesting because sometimes you see that in other genres as well. You see that in music with Rebecca Black's Friday song, where a lot of people said, man, this is bad, and nobody would if we were...
Broken Hardys?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, or the Broken Hardys?
With the Broken Hardys.
Well, the Broken Heart... Well, okay, so we're talking about real bad. We're talking about bad in its truest form and not in an ironic form. So not so bad it's good, or bad in a cheesy, campy way that is honest and also, I hate to say sincere, but definitely endearing in some way. But to jump back, when we start talking about these star ratings, a 5-star match and a 1-star match may still have 1 million views on YouTube, or may have the same amount or close to the same amount of people talking about it. And so it's really interesting when we start, taking a look at the spectrum and, the way that everything's set up and graded, that there's still a lot of viewing, still a lot of talking, regardless of the range. And the range doesn't necessarily dictate, as it would in some other cases, like a restaurant, for example. You have a 2-star restaurant, that restaurant is most likely not popular. You walk into it, there's nobody there, the whole 9 yards. Whereas a 2-star match, you go online, you look at the match, it's pretty universal that this is a 1.5 to 2-star match, and yet it has 7 million views on YouTube, and you say, wait a minute, what is going on here? So.
Exactly, it's very subjective. And being as suggestive as it is, and being so polarizing, like, people wanting to watch the so bad it's bad, like a Jenna Morasca or Charmel, or watching the so good it's good, like Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada. There are totally two different reasons for watching said 2 matches. Am I correct on that one?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, people aren't always going to take the same things away from the same matches. Like, I remember after Wrestle Kingdom, I would talk to people that don't watch New Japan, but they saw the Okada-Kenny Omega match just because of the talk, and there was a few of them that weren't impressed, and I don't blame them, because there's a lot of that match that was very story-driven, and if you had been following the story going into it, there were things that will definitely hit you that would never hit someone that's just jumping in for the first time.
Oh, definitely it would. Because I was just doing this with my cousins, who are just getting introduced into New Japan and just getting introduced into the characters and whatnot. And I just surveyed their thoughts. And I said, oh, I can see it that way. I can see it that way. Or they have a different take on it. And that's the beauty of opinions.
Well, what were some of their takes that were unique, that differed from yours?
They felt like the last 5 minutes were drawn out a little bit, and I totally forget but it was just interesting to see how they digested the match differently than what I digested from the match, because I watch New Japan on a week-to-week basis, and they are parachuting it. If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're gonna get the outside view from the people that don't follow the product, and it's like there's I've noticed this happen with CWF Mid-Atlantic recently to go to a different company, where there will be a huge match or there'll be a big match for the company that gets talked up, and then you get a lot of people like, okay, I'll jump in and watch this, and then a good chunk of the people online are like, I didn't get it. Like the Trevor Lee hour-and-a-half long Roy Wilkins match or whatever that was. Like, I personally enjoyed it, but I could see why people were like, no, thank you.
Yeah, that match was very good, but very long.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have matches that don't normally go an hour and a half, so it's like a singular monster on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why should the 5-star system still be in place? Let's start with Tom on this one.
Well, what's going to replace it? One of the things that we have to think about in a lot of these cases, you can't just walk in and say, all right, this has to go. Because you look at the institutions and everything that's really tied into it. Right now you have Donald Trump and the Republicans saying, all right, let's get rid of the Affordable Care Act. To some people, that sounds like a good thing. But when you really start taking a look at how intertwined it is and how connected it is to so many people, and what's going to happen if it's just repealed without any real replacement, well, it's kind of dangerous and scary to think about. Now, obviously, on a lesser scale, we're not talking about the total disruption of pro wrestling or even the art of critiquing pro wrestling, but we would see a seismic shift from what we have now, which is pretty concrete, and for the most part, I would say a lot of people have some sort of faith that despite all of our differences, a lot of us can say, okay, this is a 4-star match, 5-star match, and we know what we're each talking about. We know what others are talking about, others within the community, even though we may disagree. So I feel as though there's just a better gauge. Whereas if we eliminated this system, well, then we just create a vacuum. And we create a vacuum where everybody begins to rise up with their own rating systems. Next thing you know, Pro Wrestling Only has their own rating system. And Death Valley Driver Review, they have their own. And all these places have their own rating systems that may or may not work and may or may not cross-pollinate very well. And again, when you start taking a look at the reduction of the 5-star system, I mean, what is going to replace it?
That's
Pop-Tarts.
exactly what I was thinking.
Pop-Tarts.
Yes!
That would get expensive. I rate this match 5 Pop-Tarts. Oh wait, no, sorry, it's 4. I was hungry.
No, you got to go with the flavor.
Ah.
See, this is what I've been doing to entertain myself during WWE reviews for Voices of Wrestling, because I
was going to ask you about this.
I kind of put myself into the spot of just like reviewing every WWE show, I don't know why I kind of agreed to do it, but here I am. And so for like the lesser shows, I'll just stop doing star reviews and just say what flavor Pop-Tart the match made me think of. And I won't do it like if I'm doing a solo review, I wouldn't do that. But if I have like one or two other reviewers alongside me in the group review, and I know they can handle the heavy load, then I'm like, okay, cool. You guys can do the actual reviews. I can just fuck around and say what I think of the match, and then just put a Pop-Tart flavor at the end of it.
So which match has gained the orange cream Pop-Tart?
Oh, that is going to be a bad match. I was not a fan of the orange cream Pop-Tart.
It's like Wade Barrett when he
with
had
your Wild Berry rating.
the Wild
Yeah,
Berry.
that's one I need to go back and try, because I feel like I haven't had that one in a few years, and I might be underrating it.
So far it's going to be for an underrated match. Since the flavor's underrated, it's going to be for one of those matches where you feel people are not giving it enough praise and probably need to go back and watch it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to retire the system for a little bit because there's a new chocolate caramel flavor Pop-Tart that I have not tried yet. So I need to try that so I can put it into the into the all rating system.
I thought you were going to say that you're retiring because you're training for a marathon, or I decided to get in shape, so I got to retire the Pop-Tart system. I don't want people to get in a bad idea. So,
but yeah, it was just something where cause I thought it would be fun because it's like, all of our star ratings, they're all subjective, and at the end of the day, what my star ratings mean to me and what they mean to someone else are going to be totally different, to the point where you could almost make the comparison. My Pop-Tart ratings are just as different as the next guy's star ratings. So it's like, why not? Why not just go ridiculous like this for a night? I'm not going to do it on a show like, in all honesty, Great Balls of Fire, where you have a potential awesome match with Joe and Brock, but on your Extreme Rules or whatever. What was the last WWE pay-per-view? Was that Extreme Rules?
no, it was Money in the Bank.
Money in the Bank, yeah.
Money in the stank.
Yeah, that was one where I saw the card and I was like, cool, I can safely just talk about Pop-Tarts with this one. Yep.
Yep.
And again, I'm not advocating other people should use this system. It's more or less just it's kind of just a satire on the whole rating system. It's like they at the end of the day, they're meaningless, and more often than not, you should probably just go and read what someone actually said about the match instead of just their, at the end of the day, kind of arbitrary number rating.
And you talk about satire. I mean, we're living in I hate to say it, a pretty postmodernist age in pro wrestling, where now that you mention it, I really do believe that the next thing that replaces the star rating isn't going to be a sophisticated or even close to sophisticated system that I'm talking about or what big companies use, but it's going to be something more so through satire of someone saying, hey, you know what? 5 stars, that's passe. Let's go ahead and do it with something else. And in this case, Pop-Tarts. And one person does it. Another person sees the irony in it. Next thing you know, it spreads and it's an actual thing. And maybe it's just isolated to the pro wrestling community on Reddit. But it's still going to be something that is somewhat prominent and familiar. So even for the traditionalists who love to use the 5 stars, they may offhandedly say, you know what? I don't want to give any 5 stars. I'll just give it the s'mores Pop-Tart.
And we have 8 minutes left in this discussion. This has been really good talk about the star rating system and Pop-Tarts. It's making me hungry. And I heard you describe it as what gets more of a rouse out of people, star ratings or food?
Exactly, yeah. You always get if you bring up food in a review and people don't agree with your take, they will trash you for that and just completely leave the wrestling alone. I mean, this happens constantly in the Voices of Wrestling Twitter whenever pizza's brought up.
Yep. Or the Blue Apron meals.
Exactly, yeah.
I was going to ask about the different variations of people looking at ways to rating a match, and you brought up the Pop-Tart thing, and I was like, you took my question right out of my mouth. Thank you. But we have about 8 minutes left with this top 7 minutes. What are some of your final thoughts on the whole star rating system?
Well, let's kick that off with Kelly. So, Kelly, go ahead and chime in there, man.
I think it's definitely a system that's here to stay. I don't see it being replaced anytime soon. It's easy. You just go, it's 1 through 5, or 0 through 5, actually. But, like, it's a totally easy to grasp system. You can explain it to someone fairly easily. Like, I went through how I rate stuff in, 2 minutes before when I was saying 2 stars average, 3 stars good, 4 stars great. Like, it's not hard to explain. It's not hard to understand. You might as well just go with it.
Yeah, and
in the end, I think it's something that's here to stay, and I'm fine with it.
I think also that oh yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dan.
And something I noticed was about this is the first year I've been doing actual match of the year tracking, where I'm actually putting it down on a spreadsheet and figuring it out. I'm not gonna go by the book on I'm just going to do the 10 highest rated matches. I'm going to put thought and emotion into it, but at the same time, there's a reason why I rated something 4 3/4.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's when I go through my personal match of the year tracker stuff, I actually don't put a star rating there because I like to go back and rewatch everything, and I don't want to have a score that I had already rated it in mind the second time around. So then I kind of want more to be emotion leading at that point.
Tom, your thoughts?
One of the things that I think the 5-star system gives, it allows people to expand their interests. So again, if we start taking a look at something that is a bit more binary, then essentially it's only suggesting matches based on what you liked. So it would be a situation of you watch a match and you either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And it doesn't say anything about, well, what if you're in the middle? And I think that for me personally, when I started watching, or rather expanding my wrestling palette, I wanted to see things that were, okay, I understand this is 5 stars. I understand this is 4 stars. But hey, this is 3.5. Let me watch that. I may like it, versus someone who has less of a chance, or who doesn't have that many options, just giving it a thumbs down. Then I would probably avoid it. So currently, the system is definitely helping to expand people's palettes. Again, I don't think that we should do a repeal of it right now, for lack of a better word. Unless we have a suitable replacement, and a replacement that is a bit more concrete, as solid, if not more, than the star rating. So it has to be solid than the current system that we have in place. And yeah, like I said, we'll go from there and see what happens. Overall, me personally, I do not use it, so it can go to hell, and it wouldn't bother me.
And we'll leave it at that. For the first discussion, we'll take a brief pause, an intermission per se, being sarcastic, of course, because our next topic is a topic that got stirred up during the G1 shows in America, and and I thought this would be a fun 20-minute topic to do. Intermissions and show pacing.
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts, Kelly, when you saw this discussion on Twitter about people wanting intermissions?
That was a thing where it's like I agreed and disagreed at the same time. If I'm at a show live, I like an intermission. I like to have that time to go to the bathroom, buy a shirt, talk to some friends that are sitting in a different area than I am. I like to have that time. But if I'm watching a show at home, I don't want to go do something else for 15, 20 minutes.
No, while you're watching Jushin Liger and Shinpei Nogami talking Japanese.
Exactly.
Showing the highlights of the matches you already saw 20 minutes before.
Yeah, it's a much different feel between a live and a show you're watching on your screen experience.
Yeah. And a lot of indie shows do take intermissions for the concessions, for people to walk around, go to the bathroom, buy the t-shirts, per se. But on DVD, they always edited it out.
Yeah. And, going to the t-shirts, that's one thing I didn't really see anyone bring up, is that I'm sure, the indie wrestlers like having the intermission, because that gives them one more time to sell some shirts. Because without the intermission, it's before and potentially after the show, depending on if they need to clear out the venue real fast. But with the intermission, that gives them another whole 20 minutes where they can sell their shit.
Right. Tom, your thoughts on intermissions?
So there's several perspectives to have. I mean, if you're in... I don't think anyone who's ever been to any live event would ever say, I do not want an intermission at all. You're sitting there watching the Nutcracker. It's 3.5 hours. You're going to need to take a restroom break, go outside, have a smoke, maybe get some fresh air, call somebody, just stretch the legs. Same thing with a pro wrestling event. The problem is that when this happens while you're sitting at home, what the promoters need to realize is that they are giving people an opportunity to get up. And the opportunity for people to get up at arenas, well, they're going to come back to their seats. But if I get up from my couch while watching a show and say, well, it's been 15 minutes, time to fill my time with something else, go outside, next thing you know, I'm at a bar and I meet a girl and all this. Well, next thing you know, I'm not watching G1. So how is that handled when you start thinking about, okay, well, we want to give people an intermission and a break, but we also want to be able to run our TV show or our pay-per-view or our special in some way. And to me, I think that's really simple of you just have a 10, 15-minute block of hype videos or as you see with WWE, they go to the panel where there's nothing really going on. And that's done at a lot of points through the show. And so I think the idea for broadcasting, more specifically for pro wrestling, the idea of, okay, we're having a concentrated 15 to 30-minute intermission versus, hey, we're going to step back after 3 matches or so, and every 10 minutes we'll have an intermission after that, where essentially it's just running down the card, talking about things that just happened, backstage interviews. Exactly, and that serves as the unofficial intermission because people know, okay, 3 matches just happened, WWE just turned off all the lights and turned on the lights focusing the announcers. Nothing else really important is going to happen. Time to go to the restroom.
Yep.
So, but I think it's really interesting. So when you start talking about the comments for the intermissions, I didn't follow this conversation on Twitter. What were people saying?
Kelly,
I came to it later. Like the funny thing was, I came on Twitter. This happened like last Saturday, I think it was, or no, last Sunday.
One shows.
And like I was going through my Twitter feed, and all of a sudden I just see everyone's like, "Oh man, Twitter's terrible today." And I was like, "What the happened?" And then it was slowly like going through the debris of the explosion that had happened. And it was just a lot of people complaining about intermissions and just not liking them on shows. And I couldn't tell you any exact quotes off the top of my head, but I saw a lot of people that were not a fan of intermissions.
I don't recall seeing any tweets that really piqued my eye, because I thought the whole discussion was stupid.
I think it's interesting that we live in a society, or I'd hate to say society, but we live in a landscape right now where a lot of these pro wrestling pay-per-views, a lot of these streams, they have a lot of dead time. And so you would think if you have 3 hours that people are paying for, why would you have a filler match or even 2 filler matches? And why would you fill out this time? Like if you go to a WWE live show, you see all these ads and you're saying to yourself, you guys have 3 hours. What are you doing advertising this or advertising that? Do it during Raw. This should be the bam, 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 bam. And you're hitting people with it. And I think that a lot of people are already disappointed and disillusioned with the downtime that comes into a pro wrestling event. God forbid you go to a Raw taping.
Raw and SmackDown taping.
Those are worst.
Yeah.
They're so bad.
Yeah, they are awful.
Yeah, so there's intermissions there where as soon as they go to commercial, somebody's laying outside the ring for 5 minutes, or someone's in a headlock, or there's nothing going on. Then that red light comes on, and then all of a sudden things are happening and the action is going back. So I think people are used to that. They're tired of it. So when they see it so on the nose and so direct with ads or a big screenshot that just says intermission and it's a picture of Tanahashi smiling back at you, people are sick of it and tired of it. So I can kind of understand the reaction. Again, I wish I got to fully see the reaction and the tweets and everything and experience it so I can have a bit more comments on it. But yeah, that's what I think is happening.
But I wanted to get to something with pacing of shows and how shows are paced. Do you feel like that could be done a little bit better than what it's been doing right now? Because WWE shows are like hard to get through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that for a company like WWE, I mean, when we start talking about pacing to me isn't necessarily just how long is segment A, how long is segment B, what do we do to get from segment A to segment B? To me, that's not just the pacing. The pacing is what happens in segment A. If you have Dean Ambrose coming out to the exact same entrance, the same way, the same mannerisms, everything that he did last week, well, it kind of feels like dead air. And it feels like you're just waiting for the match to occur. Now, when that happens throughout the entire show, people can feel that it's sluggish because there's so many robotic and expected elements through the broadcast. And so I think that one of the things that can help pacing in any show is spontaneity. When the wrestlers come out, they all shouldn't act like robots. And when you start eliminating a lot of the, again, more specifically to WWE, when you start eliminating the WWE speak and all these other corporate elements that they're trying to get across all the time, it makes the show less of a chore to get through. Because at that point, it's just hitting you very hard with the WWE tropes. And so because it doesn't feel natural and spontaneous and clean and very homogenized and very controlled and very robotic at times, you realize what you're watching and for me personally, I look at certain aspects and I become, I just don't like them when it comes down to it. I just don't like them, so they really stand out. So when I really start seeing, oh, here comes this guy, and he's going to do the exact same entrance the same way. He's done it 1,000 times.
Right. And you know what's worse than a WWE taping? Believe it or not, because a Ring of Honor taping, those are the dirt worst when it comes to it. It's like 4 hours.
Oh, Ring of Honor tapings, I
5
believe
hours.
in 2007, they were like nearly 6 hour tapings in some cases.
Oh God, those HDNet times.
Yeah. And this wasn't even TV or anything. We're talking about just regular shows, or, next thing you know, people are there for close to 4 hours, or if you count the pre-show, close to 5 hours, and you're saying to yourself, holy shit.
They take an intermission.
Yeah, you have the intermission. Next thing you know, you're clearly pushing 6 hours almost, and it's not even WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, I can excuse a 6 hour show for WrestleMania weekend. I cannot sit through a regular Honor taping for 6 hours.
Oh no, I can't even excuse a 6 hour show for WrestleMania. I think that WWE has, and that's another thing about pacing. Sometimes for really good pacing, you have to scale back. If you're allotting me 6 hours to do whatever I need to do, well, of course I'm going to say, okay, well, everything I can really do and say is going to be done in the first 3 hours. And so how do I fill up the remaining 3? And that's where all the BS comes in. And that's where you get an episode like you did in 1999 or 2000 with WCW, where it has a 3 hour Nitro. And the first hour is just 100% backstage interviews, people arriving to the arena, vignettes. No wrestling is happening. No real story progression is happening until Raw comes on. And so it's just a misuse of time. So was that a well-paced show, or was it a bad-paced show?
Bad-paced show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's about time management. It's about scaling back. Again, if I never have to be a part of a 6 to 7 hour WrestleMania ever again, I will not shed a tear.
I won't either.
No, it's way too long for a show.
I fall asleep during most WWE pay-per-views. Believe it or not.
No, I believe it, because I do as well.
If I wasn't being forcing myself to pay attention to review them, I would be out. I know it.
Right. And it's just so difficult now to get through. Like, even the pay-per-views are a chore. I don't feel like wrestling should feel like a chore.
I feel like they've forgotten how to pace the pay-per-views. Because there was a time when their pay-per-views were paced really well, because they didn't feel like a Raw or SmackDown. They were their own thing. It was, okay, here's just matches, and we'll get promo packages in between, and that's it. But now it's between the matches we literally get commercial breaks. We get sometimes with just random matches that are unannounced, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's Kurt Hawkins to get squashed by someone because
it's the Ascension.
Yeah, exactly. It's just why are you doing that on the pay-per-view? That's where your big matches are supposed to be. Don't treat it like it's a Raw or a SmackDown.
And that's the worst thing that I've seen in TNA during the Hulk Hogan era, is that TNA would have these pay-per-views, and then somewhere in that pay-per-view, there was a 15 to 20 minute, and they would do this a lot. There's 15 to 20 minute talking segment of Eric Bischoff coming out and cutting a promo, or Hulk Hogan cutting a promo, and I'm saying to myself, this is a pay-per-view. Save this shit if you have to do it, or you want to do it, because they definitely don't have to do it. But save it for TV. When you have pay-per-view and you have 3 hours, that's time to blow people away. That's time to say, hey, don't get out of your seat. You already paid for this, so you're not going to be changing the channel. We have your attention, so let's do this. But running the pay-per-view, to me, is really, it just seems out of touch to run these types of shows, pay-per-view, streaming services, shows like their television show with all these ads.
Right, because a lot of people are used to no commercials and no ads. So if people are presented with a commercial, they conk out there and go, oh, you know what I mean? Any final
and there's also the part for, at least with WWE now, where it's, I'm paying to watch this service. Why am I seeing ads?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's the same thing with like Hulu until they got the Hulu Plus or whatever. It's like, I'm paying you. Stop showing me these ads.
Yeah. And I can totally understand WWE. Obviously, you have 1 million subscribers. So if you have a new line of T-shirts, it would be stupid not to advertise it to those 1 million subscribers. But I think that there's...
that's the stuff that I'm okay with that, but it's when they do, like, Mountain Dew Kickstart ads.
Yeah.
Like, stuff like that. That's when it bothers me.
Yeah, because I think that what we've seen in CMLL and MMA and boxing, there's other ways to go about advertisement than just a commercial that disrupts the product.
Yes.
If WWE wanted to, and they should, for their kickoff shows, they should just have the brands all over the place. Instead of having the audience in the background, just do it like the UFC does. Have that big banner with Mountain Dew Kickstarter energy drink. Everybody's drinking it. And do your shameless plugging for an entire hour before the pay-per-view starts. And then when the pay-per-view starts, you're done. And then after, set it up to where, hey, we're going to get some exclusive comments from the new WWE champion, plus Stone Cold's popping by with a surprise, and Chris Jericho's going to talk about his new book. And so then some people will say, well, let me stick around and watch that post-show, and bam, there's the advertisement again. So you have advertisement on the front end, on the back end, so there's really no need for an intermission as far as playing a traditional commercial or any real product placement that would take up time due to some video.
Right. Any final thoughts on this?
I always wonder why WWE has never decided to put advertising on the ring mats themselves. Because, I mean, New Japan does it, and they obviously must make a decent amount of money doing it, because they always have ads on there. I mean, one of my favorite things when I really started paying attention to what was on there was the Best of the Super Juniors year when they had the Mad Max ad on the turnbuckles. It's like, I don't get why WWE doesn't do that, because if you're going to interrupt your show with ads, just put it on the ring mat. Who cares?
I would assume, and so to me, I think it's just two things. I think it's an aesthetics thing, so Vince McMahon doesn't like it. And Vince McMahon and company probably don't want it to make it seem as though any other company is the star. So when you look at WWE, you're looking at their ring, their logo, what they have going on. And one of the complaints that I've had about the UFC and just MMA for a very long time is that these companies weren't branding themselves. They were helping to brand others through sponsorships. Right. So next thing you know, you turn into a Strikeforce pay-per-view, and there's Rockstar Energy Drink and Full Tilt, and there's this and there's that, and it's just a walking commercial. And then the fighters come in, and they're all wearing everything, and then the fight's sponsored by Toyota, and it's just way too much advertising. And people complain about Michael Bay movies. And one of the things that I liked about the UFC is that they scaled back on that, and it became more about the brand. When you watch a UFC pay-per-view, you are watching the UFC. Now, obviously, yes, there's still advertisement of some sort and sponsorship, but they've scaled it back and cleaned it up to where the focus is back on the product that they're actually selling, which of course is the UFC. Another issue that WWE could run into is, what if you have WrestleMania sponsored by Monster Energy Drink? And then next year, Monster and WWE, for some reason, just get in this big lawsuit, and they say, hey, you know what? You can still show WrestleMania 35, but you have to blur out every single Monster logo. Next thing you know, you have Roman Reigns and John Cena in a ladder match for the WWE title, and they're surrounded by blurs. Blurs in the turnbuckle, blurs on the mat, blurs on the entranceway, and it just looks terrible. I think that WWE experienced this with their WWF logo when they had to blur that out for some time.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think there's always been that hesitation, but I think that it was solidified once you have all this archive footage, and it's like, okay, well, time to go blur everything out, which is a cost right there and a different process. And then just aesthetically, it just doesn't look good.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that is fair. So, let's wrap up this discussion on intermissions. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Kelly?
No, I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say. I like them when I'm there at a show, and if I'm not at a show, find a way to entertain me. Because I remember, there was a Ring of Honor New Japan show. I want to say I got the pay-per-view for it, and they had an intermission. But while they were doing that, they showed the Nakamura versus Kevin Steen match from the year before.
Oh, right.
And it's like, perfect. That's exactly what you should be doing on an intermission.
Yeah, I think there's other ways, especially since we have technology and the way that it is. If you have an intermission, you want to have a 30-minute intermission, that's fine. Turn on a Stone Cold podcast or whatever it may be. Make it a very special intermission, exclusive for the fans at home. So while everyone else is going to the bathroom and getting nachos at the arena, I'm sitting down saying, okay, this is an exclusive 15-minute Stone Cold podcast with Terry Funk or whoever it may be. They're talking about the new book. It's only happening here, and they'll pick up the conversation next Friday on the podcast, but here's the first 15 minutes. Or just something like that. Just something where we're like, okay, we're getting something here. Versus, again, that picture of Tanahashi just smiling back at you.
Well, that is nice and all.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
Ooh, WWE just did a house show title change.
What?
AJ Styles defeated Kevin Owens for the U.S. title.
Holy shit.
Oh, wow.
That's a big title change, too. Normally it's like the Cruiserweight title or like the SmackDown tag titles or something.
Did that match happen before or after intermission?
Probably after.
No, that's a trick question. It happened during intermission.
Yes!
So.
But I just saw that on the breaking news. So you got exclusive breaking news.
Speaking of breaking news, earlier today, Austin Aries released from WWE. Austin Aries has been future endeavored. Kelly, what do you think about that? What is going on there? What happened with Austin Aries?
I think he definitely had a ceiling, and he's like, I'm not going anywhere with this 205 Live. I got my WrestleMania match. I don't think I'll get any higher than that, and I'm just gonna call it a day. Because from what I've been hearing, he asked for his release. And this actually goes to what I wanted to bring up with my my guest topic, which is it cool if we bring that in real fast?
Yeah, let's do the guest topics right now and then go into the New Japan.
All right, so my topic was going to be, who do you guys think in WWE right now could benefit from leaving and hitting the Indies? Austin Aries is now in that list, but the guys that immediately came to my mind, the Revival.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they've got a built-in feud with the Young Bucks, and that's going to draw them probably way more money than they're making in WWE right now.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely think that not only do they have the Young Bucks, but New Japan would scoop them up. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
with Roppongi Vice and so many other people and so many other great tag teams in New Japan, and Ring of Honor would love to have them as well. So, if the Revival were to be released or ask for their release, they would 100% not starve. And then, of course, TNA being what it is, they're going to make a play as well. But hopefully the Revival would stay as far away from TNA as possible.
GFW now.
Oh,
Not
yes.
TNA
Yeah,
anymore.
GFW. Jeff Jarrett is one of the greatest con men in pro wrestling history. One of the biggest carnies. I mean, we talk about Vince McMahon. Jeff Jarrett has to be, and this is saying a lot when we talk about the carnies of pro wrestling. If Vince McMahon is number one, Jeff Jarrett,
Number 2.
I wouldn't go that far. But I will say that to me, Jeff Jarrett is easily in the top 5.
Yeah, for sure.
There is no... If you would have told me in 1996 that Jeff Jarrett would be a multi-time NWA champion, multi-time WCW world champion, start his own promotion go 15 years, where he has Hogan, Nash, Sting, Booker T, etc., all the big names, and then leaves the promotion to essentially set up an umbrella company to buy that promotion back later. I mean, come on. This guy is in the Pro Wrestling Carney Hall of Fame.
And got Vince to fund the TNA project. We can't forget about that.
That's true. And along the way, worked his way into a Bullet Club angle and married Kurt Angle's wife.
Yeah. I mean, this guy, and then at one point in time, they had a pyramid scheme. GFW had a pyramid scheme where you could buy gold. I mean, this guy is unbelievable and one of the smartest guys in pro wrestling.
And he still hasn't paid his workers because they haven't signed the W-2s.
Yeah, and it's amazing he's still around. And not only is he still around, but he doesn't have the... As much as TNA has a scumbag reputation, Jeff Jarrett, for the most part, has kept himself free of that. So when people start talking about all the shady stuff that occurred in TNA, Jeff Jarrett definitely had a hand in it. But Dixie Carter is the main one. Dixie Carter and Vince Russo are the main people that are always going to be blamed for the major failures of TNA.
Speaking of Dixie Carter, how about that? She's going to be on a WWE program.
Where are you hearing this? Are you making up this news? Is this fake
No.
news, Danny?
No, it's not fake news.
Is this
She's
fake
gonna be on
news?
WWE 24 with Kurt Angle.
Oh, wow.
Wait, is she interviewing him, or is he walking through the hallway and he happens to hug her? I mean, what are we talking about here?
No, she's being interviewed for this.
Oh, wow.
WWE literally released a press release about this today.
Well, to be honest, Kurt Angle was in TNA longer than he was in WWE.
Right.
And it's really hard to, when you start talking about Kurt Angle, for me, it's really hard to ignore the TNA years. I mean, he had a lot of good matches there, especially with guys who are in WWE currently. So pulling back the curtain and saying, hey, you know what? Now that Dixie Carter is out of the craziness, let's pull her aside and let's talk about Angle and AJ. Let's talk about Angle and Joe. Let's talk about these matches. Let's talk about Angle and Sting. And let's work all of this into the mythology of selling Kurt Angle, because the people that watch those type of specials, they already know about TNA. They already know about TNA. They've most likely seen these matches or heard about it. You do not debut at the Royal Rumble to a loud pop and people jumping out of their seats if no one knows, or if no one doesn't know about your company. So AJ Styles proved that. People know. Samoa Joe proved that. So many people have proven that TNA definitely had eyes. They were unable to maintain a solid and strong fan base, but the knowledge of the presence is there. And so I think having Dixie Carter, while she might not be the best to talk to about Kurt Angle and his time in TNA, at least she is sober. She doesn't have anything crazy on her record that would embarrass WWE or embarrass Kurt Angle or embarrass anyone involved. And I don't see a problem with it.
And we could literally say TNA. You could literally say the New York territory traded Dixie Carter for Austin Aries today.
Wow.
That was an Alan Cunahan tweet. I can't take credit for that. That was all Alan for Alan there.
Well, they've traded up.
They have traded up.
No, I'm joking now. They have not traded up. Well, I didn't know you were a big fan of Dixie Carter over there.
No. Wasn't there an actress named Dixie Carter too?
Yeah. There's in Designing Women, there's a Dixie Carter.
On to Kelly's guest topic. Tom, what is your guest topic?
My guest topic is simply this. I'm just curious as to, I saw the other day a post on rape culture in pro wrestling. And I feel as though a lot of people have a problem with that. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I feel as though a lot of people, if there were a vote, hey, do you ever want to see a rape angle again in pro wrestling? It will be a majority and overwhelmingly no.
No.
However, what I don't see is the same outrage or the same pointing out of sexual assault and molestation within pro wrestling. Because this happens as well. I mean, obviously rape is very serious. So I don't want to try and downplay it. But when we take a look at the spectrum of unwanted sexual activity, and we look at someone like a Goldust, who essentially in the mid to late 90s, I mean, this guy was getting his feel goods on unconscious men, kissing them, getting on top of them, the whole 9 yards. This would be, if held in a court of law, right then and there, sexual assault. And a lot of these, I don't want to say a lot, but you definitely see it online where people say, oh man, the old Goldust is back. I wish he would act the way that he did before. That would be funny. And so I'm just kind of curious, and I want your guys' opinions on this, but what is it about something that a Goldust would do where people feel that's acceptable or funny, or they don't necessarily mind it on their TV, where you talk about the sexual assault, but when we graduate to rape, or things that people could assume to be rape, or clearly lead to rape, well, why is that too much? What is it? I'm just trying to figure out this spectrum here, and how pro wrestling fans interpret it, interact with it, how they want it to expand, why only certain parts that they want to get rid of. I haven't really thought about this a lot, so I'm just really casing for ideas here.
I think somewhat wrestling fans are perverted. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There are some creeps.
Oh, I know wrestling fans are perverted. I mean, weren't you the one who said that Dixie Carter is a trade up from Austin Aries?
Yeah, that's pretty perverted myself. But some people just like that stuff, and it's weird. And I get uncomfortable watching the Attitude Era now. I get uncomfortable. Because you look at 99 WWF, it's almost as bad as 2000 WCW.
Yeah.
And people said, oh, that was ahead of the time, ahead of the curve. But a lot of that shit wouldn't pass by today.
No. And a lot of the times when I talk to people about stuff like that, I always tell them to leave the memories alone. Don't go back and rewatch it because you're just going to be disappointed. Because a lot of people, they'll just remember the Attitude Era. It's like, all this cool stuff Steve Austin and The Rock did. And it's like, yeah, but do you remember, like, literally any of the undercard feuds and how gross some of those got?
Yeah. Yeah, it was weird how gross it got for some iota of time. And it's just really weird how people grasp the Attitude Era as this great era when it was really a piece of crap that was behind on the times.
Yeah, it's very much colored by nostalgia, for sure. And I really think we'll get to a point in a few years where it's kind of universally looked back on as there was some good stuff, but overall it was a very bad time of wrestling.
You could even say the new generation was better than the Attitude Era.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of the people that are excited about, oh, here's the new, or here's the old Goldust coming back, it's not that they're actually excited about that. They're just like, this is how Goldust was when I was a kid. And that must mean that it's great, because I remember loving it when I was a kid. I think it's more like that. And they don't really go into like, oh yeah, that was really weird when he was kissing Ahmed Johnson. But
yeah,
it's one of those things where I think people, they react and they don't really think about what they're reacting to in that sense.
No, not at all. Tom, your thoughts?
Like I said, I haven't really thought about this entirely. So I think just where it really comes down to is people are... I feel that people can relate more to rape, if I can say that. And I don't mean it as people are rapists or have rape tendencies. But I feel as though this is, when I say relate, you hear that more in the news than some girl getting her butt grabbed or a guy getting randomly kissed. So you hear about rape, and so when you hear about it and you realize how horrible it is, you don't necessarily want to see it in entertainment. What is interesting is that some of these people that complain about rape culture or just even the close portrayal of a rape in pro wrestling are the same people that would watch a Law and Order SVU episode without even blinking. And that's their favorite TV show. And so to me, I find it kind of interesting how we can watch a movie about a rape victim or a victim of domestic abuse coming back to take revenge, a phoenix rising from the ashes. But there's still something about pro wrestling where that story is too far. And we can accept everything up until that. So we can accept Goldust giving quote-unquote CPR to Ahmed Johnson or all these other things that occurred. Just to go off the example that Kelly gave. But I don't know what it is. I think it's because, again, it's about relating. where we can't necessarily relate to someone just randomly grabbing ass or going in for a kiss. And if we do, I feel as though there's some sort of social justification of this. And what I mean by that is you have a situation where obviously Bill Cosby's situation is a bit more ominous. But if you scale it back and you have a guy and a girl in a room and a guy goes in for a kiss, yeah, the kiss was unwanted. And technically, if we're really getting down to it, it could be considered sexual assault. But in reality, it's just a guy who likes a girl and they're having a date and he mistimed a kiss. But she doesn't call the cops and it's not a big thing. It's just, oh, hey, I wasn't ready to kiss you, or you're just a friend and I don't see you like that. So I guess, again, and I know I don't have the words for it now. Maybe I'll do an episode on the suplex down the line when I get to think about it a little bit more and really dig through the wrestling archives to see how it's been portrayed over the years. I mean, there's definitely been a scale back. But I always feel as though whenever we know that rape is not funny, there's nothing hilarious about rape. And I think where these companies really fail when presenting these angles is, number one, nobody really wants to see it because pro wrestling is this thing that a lot of us have been embarrassed about for our entire lives. So please don't embarrass us any further. And not only that, but it's something where wrestling companies feel as though they need to add some sort of comedy to it or some sort of irony to it, where you already take something that's distasteful and embarrassing and you make it even worse by making it somehow campy. So now you have the whole Bobby Dempsey angle in Ring of Honor, and it goes down and you're just sitting there saying, oh, how does anyone think this is a good idea? So I don't know. It's interesting to me. It's really weird. But again, perhaps this will be a future episode of the Suplex when I have my thoughts together on this. But yeah, I just find it really interesting.
Good thoughts, Tom.
Wait, what happened to Bobby Dempsey? I don't remember this story at all.
Oh, man. Do we want to get into
Let's get into it because I think there's going to be like 10,000 podcasts reviewing the New Japan shows in the U.S. But this is interesting.
Yeah. Well, take it away, Dan. You are the host. I do not want to steal your thunder.
All right. What was the Bobby Dempsey thing?
Oh, so...
This is what I'm choosing to go with.
Okay. So, Bobby Dempsey, a long time ago, in Ring of Honor, they essentially booked a rape angle. And Gabe had to apologize for this. So what happened is that essentially he perpetuated a simulated rape on Alice in Danger. And this was during an interview segment. Yep. So Larry Sweeney ordered beatdown. After that, he insisted that Bobby Dempsey go in there and make a woman out of her or become a man. Or I can't remember the verbiage. This was so long ago.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so this was like 2008. Because I remember Gabe had to actually come out and apologize for this. And so, yeah, and it was very controversial at the time. And again, just to set the stage, because I want to go back so everyone has the full context here. Because I'm jumping around and I'm giving little bits and pieces. But let's try and get the full context. So Larry Sweeney comes out. He's doing his talk show. He brings out Alice in Danger. That's his guest. And he then starts, and then this is when the slut shaming comes in. She's a slut. She's a whore. The locker room. The whole 9 yards.
Right.
Alice in Danger doesn't want to put up with this. She tries to leave. But then Larry Sweeney hits her over the head with a mic. So this winds up knocking her out. So Alice in Danger doesn't want to sit here and be called a slut and all this other stuff and degraded. So she goes to leave. Larry Sweeney bops her on the head. Then he turns to Dempsey and says that it's time for him to be a man and fill her up.
Oh, jeez.
So Dempsey, of course, the good guy in this situation, Dempsey's the good guy. He doesn't want to do it. He refuses. Larry Sweeney hits him over the head with the mic. And Bobby Dempsey then lands on Alice in Danger face down. And then once they're in this compromising position, Larry Sweeney goes over to kick Bobby Dempsey and makes it seem like he's having sex with her, and then goes on to say that Sweet and Sour Inc. is going to be getting a hostile takeover of Ring of Honor. So it's weird. That was the situation that got Ring of Honor into a ton of trouble. And like I said, Gabe had to apologize because at the end of the day, you can't run an angle like that. And when you run an angle like that, it doesn't put the heat on the wrestlers. It puts the heat on the writers.
Yeah.
It puts the heat on the company. But again, if you look at Paramount Pictures or whoever does Law and Order SVU, you can have these characters be completely despicable and commit 3 or 4 rapes in an episode, and at the same time, nobody's blaming the writers. No one's blaming Paramount or Viacom or any of these other companies. But in pro wrestling, it is totally different.
I think that might be because wrestling has one foot in reality. Because there's always was that a shoot? Oh, that had to be a shoot. There's always that, like, in the background where people are thinking about stuff like that. Mm. And because of that, we tend to view wrestlers more as real people instead of, like, actors where when you're watching them in an episode of Law & Order, that's the character. That's not the actor. That's just a person on your TV screen. You're never going to think about them again as soon as that show's done. But when it comes to a wrestler, you follow them on Twitter, and they're tweeting in the gimmick. And it's like, okay, this is who they are. So that gets in your head, and then something like that angle happens, and it's like, okay, Alice in Danger was just violated in front of me. Regardless of that being an angle or not, Gabe needs to apologize for this. He should never have let something like that happen.
Right.
To build off what you're saying, I also think that it comes down to the fact that a lot of these writers have come out, hey, that character, I'm responsible for it. And you see this with Vince Russo all the time. The Rock, yeah, I'm responsible for The Rock. I'm responsible for Goldust. I'm responsible for Steve Austin. I'm responsible for all these people. And so you always see these writers and people backstage wanting to step in the spotlight, where you don't necessarily see that in other genres of entertainment, where a songwriter is perfectly content in some cases of being a songwriter, and people in the business know who he or she is. So this person can always get work, and they're getting lucrative work, but they don't really care if the person down the street knows who they are and what songs that they've written. Because it will all come a time where these things will come to pass and they'll make the money and whatever it may be. But with pro wrestling, you're constantly berated, hey, I created that, I created that, I created that. So the moment you see something that you don't like, you momently say, hey, you created that. And that's one of the things that I think is also happening as well. I mean, again, pro wrestling hasn't really put its foot down and said, we are completely fantasy, and this is how we're going to react, and this is what we're going to do, because they like to still play both sides of the fence like it's 1930s or something. Yep. Well, this is the issue that we come into.
Yes. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Plugs. Who wants to start with their plugs?
I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can find me on Twitter at Comic Geek Kelly. Only 1K. I've been using that name since I was a kid, and I used that for pretty much everything because I understood branding from a young age. You can find me on Voices of Wrestling. I write I work on pretty much all of the WWE reviews. I just wrapped up my Tiger Mask W review column. The series came to a close, and I wrote my 38th and final installment of the column. So we'll see what other weird things I choose to write about next. Who knows? It might be another kind of... You never know when, like, Tanahashi is just going to show up in an episode of Kamen Rider or something. But I got that. Every now and then I write on panelsonpages.com, but you can find me every Tuesday on the Panels on Pages podcast, where we talk about all various pop culture things and comics. And recently we've been doing a fantasy basketball tournament of comic characters with 3-on-3 street ball games where we debate them, and lately it's pretty much been turning into who can figure out how to use their superpowers to make the opponents poop their pants and not be able to play basketball.
This sounds amazing.
There was one guy who submitted his team, and he purely put from the Legion of Superheroes Infectious last because he knew she could give everyone in the other team horrible diarrhea. And so they wouldn't be able to play basketball. Wow. And it's like, the logic there is sound.
Oh yeah, it's very sound. Beat them before they step onto the court.
Yeah, so after that, literally everyone was like, okay, how can I figure out how to make my team make everyone shit their pants?
That's funny.
But yeah,
Tom,
that's where you can find me.
You can find Kelly talking about shit in his pants on the podcasts and Voices of Wrestling, and also Panels on Pages. For me, the Military Industrial Suplex, you can find that on the Place to Be Nation, the Pro Wrestling Only feed on SoundCloud. We are up to episode 8, technically. But what I want to try and do, and what I'm doing, is every month, it sounds like I've been getting feedback, and people just want one episode a month where I'm just shooting the shit and just talking about pro wrestling with a pro wrestling fan or a person within the business. So we're definitely going to do that. I have something exciting for next month. I hope it all pans out and we can proceed on that route. And yeah, Twitter is at MIS Podcast. That's at MIS Podcast. And that is the Military Industrial Suplex.
You can find me on Twitter at MeatPressSlam. You can find me tweeting about various wrestling things and the horrendous grunge night I was at last week. This past week. You can email the show at meetthepressslam@gmail.com. And you can like the Facebook page and doing various stuff. So that's about it. Thank you, Kelly and Tom, for...
Oh, thank you for having us.
I hope we did not embarrass you.
Oh, no. Nothing can embarrass me. Nothing can. And nothing will.
No, very good. And with that, I give this podcast 2 strawberry Pop-Tarts.
Solid.
Yes.
Solid.
Very solid rating.
I'd go the full blueberry.
I remember my mom told my brother one day, because he wanted blueberry Pop-Tarts. This is when we were, 7, 8 years old, whatever. And she said, no, you only want blueberry Pop-Tarts because you just want to be weird and different. And to that day, or from that day forward, he never got blueberry Pop-Tarts. So I don't know how much that actually traumatized him, or how much he was actually called out on his shit and he was being a hipster, a 7-year-old hipster, like, yeah, I'll do the blueberry, because I'm cool, or whatever. I don't know. But yeah.
Blueberry Pop-Tarts are very tasty.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the blueberry. I like those a lot.
No, you just like them because you're trying to be weird and different.
I mean, that's true, but...
Any of those unfrosted Pop-Tarts are the ones that are hipstery.
Yeah, no, why bother? Like, why even bother if they're unfrosted?
Yeah, that's someone who's, it's like taking the skin off a chicken and saying, well, it makes it more organic. If I take the fried skin off this KFC, then it makes it more organic. So, yeah.
Yes. The discussions me and Tom get into sometimes.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, Lord. I'm so tired.
Well, go to sleep.
I almost that's what I'm going to do.
Before you go into that, Danny, you do realize you have not signed off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this podcast is still going. People are still listening.
Let's keep going. Before I fall asleep on you guys, let's sign off.
The best podcasts are the ones where you don't know if they actually end or not.